Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast. And this week we're going way outside my comfort zone, talking to the underwater filmmaker and cave diver, Jill Heinerth. Jill is an amazing woman whose explorations have taken her to places no person has ever seen before, including caves inside icebergs. We talk about her career underwater, how she controls her own fears, and what it's like filming documentaries and consulting on feature films. Alright, now remember to breathe, and let's dive in. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
How are you? How's things up in Ottawa?
Oh, good. It's bearably hot today, but I should enjoy that now because I'll be wishing for that in the winter.
Because it gets pretty cold up there, right?
Oh, yeah. Minus 40 is not unusual in our winter.
Right. Okay. So you got your dry suit on in the winter?
Oh, yeah. I have my dry suit on in the summer here.
Oh, no, I just meant around the house. But,
oh, yeah.
Hey, I was kind of telling you beforehand, but I just want to reiterate now that because you're a cave diver, and prepping for this interview, it was really emotional for me. It was a roller coaster of excitement and interest, and also fear. And you must get that a lot from people when they're talking to you about how do you even do this?
Oh, yeah, especially my mom.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. My mom's been to some of my presentations, and when she does, she sits in the back of the room just sort of clutching her purse with the color draining from her face. But yeah, what I do scares people.
It's incredible. I guess it's worse for your mum because she's your mum, and picturing you doing these things would be freaking her out.
Well, it's hard for her to picture. I mean, it's such an abstract world. Swimming through water-filled passages beneath your feet is like something that some people have never even considered could be done. And so it was completely foreign to my family. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I mean, for me, I grew up caving and abseiling and doing all sorts of fun stuff. And so I know what the inside of caves are like, and I know what the sort of techniques you need to get through caves, like going through squeezes and, inching your way up chimneys and all that sort of stuff. But to then do that underwater with a mask and a regulator on, and not really being able to communicate very well with your team and whoever else is with you, that just takes it to another level for me.
It's funny, and this will be surprising to you, but I am more comfortable in a cave underwater than I am in a dry cave.
That's I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Have you what's the difference for you? Why does one make you feel more comfortable than the other?
It's the absence of gravity underwater that makes me feel so free, to be able to move without effort in 3 dimensions with all my, life support with me. I remember dry caving as a kid and squeezing through this little slot, in a tight spot where you have to just kind of exhale to get through. And somebody made a comment about, oh, wouldn't it be awful if the rock shifted on you right now? And I kind of thought, oh, and that made me feel terribly claustrophobic. And I don't feel claustrophobic underwater in a cave. It's just my element.
That's so interesting. So it's just the amazing feeling and the surrealness of it trumps the fear of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I'm not afraid. I'm definitely afraid, but fear is important. I mean, it's important to dive with people who are also afraid, because it means that we care about the outcome. We have an understanding of risk, and that's all good.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a thing where some people can have no fear, and then they don't have the warning signs. They're not looking for things to go wrong. How does that work for you? Is there a point where you kind of get? I feel like fear is a sliding scale, and you can start off being scared and cautious and maybe a little anxious. And then there's fear where you're starting to possibly lose control of your mind or your willpower. Yeah. How far along that scale do you end up getting?
Well, I mean, there's sort of 2 stages. Before I get in the water, I'm afraid of things that could go wrong. And so I worked through that list to, convince myself really that I have the tools and the skills and the ability to handle anything that could go wrong, specifically like step by step. Like, I rehearse these things. So when I get in the water, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm comfortable and confident. But still, you can have, major emergencies happen. And, if you're stuck in an underwater cave and suddenly you can't see and your guideline is broken, then the first thing that's going to happen is your heart rate is going to go through the roof, and you're going to start to breathe fast, and your head kind of explodes in these chattering monkeys. But at that point, I guess I have almost like a Zen-like ability just to take a deep breath and clear all of that away and tell myself that the emotions are not going to be helpful right now. And I can push them aside and just be pragmatic, because I can't breathe fast. I can't let my heart rate go. I can't let my mind run away, or I'll die. It's that simple. So I've learned through practice really to set those aside and then just focus on one small step towards success and survival at a time.
And so you've just kind of built this foundation of almost techniques of how to keep yourself focused, I guess.
I mean, the first time that anyone has a terrifying experience of any sort, it can result in just panic, but each time you have another one of these experiences and you've learned how to deal with them, you get better and better. So it can be trained. Yeah.
The thing for me, and we've jumped into this kind of the fear part of this a lot quicker than I was hoping to. But the thing for me that happened was, I loved caving. I loved kind of crawling through these spaces and exploring them, and then coming at the end of the cave and going, oh wow, that was incredible. I did that. But I remember vividly the day claustrophobia hit me, because I was going through a squeeze that ended up sort of heading downhill. And for some stupid reason, I'd gone through with my arms at my side. And so I was wider than I should have been. And then I got stuck by my shoulders, upside down in this kind of chimney sort of style, hanging upside down, looking down into a pile of dirt. And that was that point where I just realized that I lost it. That's where my fear kicked in. And I was not the same after that. I couldn't do it anymore because I kept thinking back to that fear.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that kind of situation, or did you, like you say, you just kept practicing and learning that you didn't die, so it's not a problem?
Yeah. I mean, when I look back on earlier experiences in life, not necessarily even cave diving, but I didn't, deal with them as well as I do now. So like I say, it's that practice. I mean, certainly we all carry, the stress or the PTSD from situations like the one that you just described. And it's hard to shake that. And I've had to, go through those kind of situations mentally afterwards over and over and over again. What happened? Why did it happen? What could I have done differently? And so I take those experiences then as gifts, really, and I say, okay, this won't happen to me again, because I'll never go down a hole like that with my arms at my side, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I've learned. So that's discovery learning. It's no longer a failure. It's no longer a trauma. It's no longer claustrophobia. It's discovery. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. It was scary, but I survived it. And I learned that next time I'll do better. So I guess it's just an acceptance that all of these horrible things in life that happened before, I can't change them. I can't change, the trauma that I felt then, but I can change what I do with that experience in the future and move forward with that discovery.
That's beautiful. So you're basically, as much as you're a cave diver because you're into discovery, you're discovering yourself, your own psyche. You're really kind of getting deep into that as well.
Which is kind of handy in these weird times we're living in right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I feel like a lot of the times we're actually like currently diving solo at home, like we're adrift in our own little cave system maybe. And we're having to deal with it.
In the more positive sense, we are all explorers in a brand new world, where every day we're learning new things about ourselves and how to move forward more safely in this new world. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And luckily we've all got the internet, so we can share these experiences. It's not like we're doing this in the 90s where we had We had nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this awesome quote that's on your website, and I just wanted to kind of read it out so people can get an idea of who you are and what your kind of life has meant to this point.
Mm.
And it's from director James Cameron, and he says, "More people have walked on the moon than have been to some places Jill Heinerth has gone to right here on Earth." Now that statement is incredible, because thinking that you've been to places that maybe only one or two other people have ever been,
Or nobody.
or
Yeah.
nobody, yeah, like you're the
Yeah.
first person in there. How does that feel to you, like hearing that kind of statement now that you've had an entire career to this point?
Oh, I mean, I still pinch myself every day. I have these amazing opportunities. As a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, but really, what it was is just a desire for exploration and to have the opportunity to go to places and see things and bring back documentation and science from places that nobody else on this planet has ever set eyes on is amazing. I'm so fortunate, and I love what I do.
It's an incredible kind of career.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a job, at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, but it's also a love for you, I guess, as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think I'm incredibly fortunate to have, found a way to turn my passion into my career. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get into this? How did you go from, I don't know, someone living in Canada
Mm-hmm.
to cave diving all over the world?
Well, some people would say I'm a 30 plus year overnight success.
Right.
Because yeah, I mean my university education is in fine arts. I have a degree in visual communications design, a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and a lot of people think I'm a scientist, but I'm really a citizen scientist. And every project gives me an opportunity to explore some new area and collaborate with some new scientists. So it's really interesting to me, because I think there's so many fantastic opportunities when you can put together a right brain and a left brain
Sure.
and explore the world. Yeah. But as soon as I started diving in university, I knew this was the thing. I was always a water baby. I always wanted to dive, but I didn't, really have the funding or the know-how in terms of, I didn't even know what to do to take a scuba class until I was in
Yeah.
university. But once I did it, there was sort of no turning back. Instantly, I knew that was my element. This was something I was going to be good at, and started plotting a way to turn my, drafting table into a way to be creative underwater.
And so what was the next step there from I guess
Mm,
having a
yeah.
career as a graphic designer to then.
Yeah, I sold everything.
Oh, right.
Sold
Yeah.
everything I owned, quit my, job, sold my business, and moved to the Cayman Islands, and started improving my ability as a diver and working on my skills as a photographer. I mean, at the time we were shooting, film cameras underwater, and
Yeah.
and so that's how I cut my teeth, and started writing articles and submitting them to magazines, and then sort of broke into the expeditionary world and volunteered and met scientists and engineers, and just plotted my way forward, one step at a time.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful, the kind of path you've taken. And with your creative side, with the photography, was that something that was that you had done before on dry land, or was photography new to you underwater?
Yeah, I was always, interested in photography. And funny enough, I only took one class in photography in university. So it was not my specialty by any means, but I'm sort of grateful looking back on that for introducing me to dark rooms and all the
Yeah.
basic skills that still apply today when you're photoshopping an image.
Yeah.
But I was completely self-taught underwater, because as soon as you take a camera system underwater, especially a film camera, it's all bets are off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Were
yeah,
you shooting on, was it the Nikonos system?
yeah.
Yeah.
I was, yeah. But back in the day when you can't see what you shot until you've taken your film in and gotten it processed, it's a whole different ballgame. It was more technical, really, back then than it is today. I mean, now cameras are so advanced. There's so much you can do with something that's fully automatic, but still, I would argue that the real creativity and customization is in the hands of the professional who really understands what they're capturing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and especially
Yeah.
with film, because you don't
Hmm.
get instant feedback. You can't adjust your settings. You kind of
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
just hope that you've done the right thing
Yeah. I
for
mean, I
that
remember those
situation.
days in university in that one photo class that I took, how am I going to get money for the next box of paper that I need or
Right.
the
Yeah.
next spool of film? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just dumping a bunch of
Hmm.
photos onto your laptop and going, "Oh, okay, well, next time."
Hmm. Yeah. Next
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Messed it up, you'd wasted money.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I got 2 more shifts at the bar before I can afford a box of 100
Yeah,
sheets of
yeah,
paper.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what sort of stuff were you shooting at the beginning? Was it just personal stuff, like just as you were diving, or was there some sort of client relationship involved there?
I mean, really, I just started shooting on my own, just, looking at light, looking for the beauty. And everybody who's a new photographer underwater starts like a species collection. It's like, oh, I want to shoot a trumpet fish. Oh, I want to shoot a shark. Oh, I need a shot of a turtle. But you end up chasing around a lot of animals and getting butt shots of everything that's running away from you. Sort of phase two is coming to the realization that, I should just shoot whatever wants to cooperate with me, and I should just be patient and work at something, whether it's a coral or whether it's shark photography, but I should just, be patient and plot away and understand this thing and how it behaves. And yeah, so there's all these different phases in photography. And then I eventually just started shooting to, support the articles I was writing for magazines.
Oh, what were those articles? Were they
Some were
kind of,
travel and
oh,
some
yeah.
were, creature focused. Some were new environments and exploration. And I, slowly started doing more sort of narrative stories about unique experiences and explorations underwater.
So travel log kind of style
Mm-hmm,
things, or
mm-hmm.
yeah. How did that end up sort of happening? Were you just submitting randomly to magazines, or did you end up
Totally.
getting? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's still that way today. I'm just still throwing spaghetti at the wall in many ways,
Right. Yeah.
I write, I photograph, I do, underwater cinematography, and some things are my own projects, and others are, commissions from people that reach out and contact me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, what are your commissions like these days? I mean, looking through your kind of work, you've done
Yeah.
a lot of different stuff with a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
outlets. What sort of things? Just talk us through those. How you got into sort of doing stuff for Nat Geo and Discovery
Yeah.
and BBC and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, more often than not, I'm coming up with the ideas and pitching the stories and trying to get someone interested in supporting the expedition, and then at other times people reach out to me as well. I just today, Red Bull is releasing both articles and a short film that I provided all the footage for. So
Oh, great. So I guess rather than you being hired to shoot some footage for a documentary, are you more making the expedition and then trying to basically sell the documentary that you're making or that you're involved in?
yeah, a little bit of both. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I apply for grants for the logistics portion of expeditions, like to someone like Nat Geo, and then they basically have a first right of refusal and a 1 year lock on anything I shoot. And then after, a year, if they're not doing anything with it, all the rights revert to me, and I can either, create my own film or write articles or whatever. It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. I mean, when I first started down this path, I mean, so much has changed from being in university, and in order to create a graphic design, we didn't have computer design. We would send out for linotype, to where we are today. It's changed, but the filmmaking world has changed too, where there used to be a very small, upper echelon of commissioners, basically, that you had to get attention from. But there was a lot more money and fewer distribution outlets. I mean,
Right.
now everyone's a filmmaker. I mean, you don't need anybody's permission. You don't need anyone's commission. You can have your own YouTube channel and start there. So the gatekeepers are gone in that regard, but so has the funding also been diluted. So it requires you to be a little bit more, inventive with how you can put food on the table.
Yeah. So you're throwing a
Yeah.
lot more spaghetti at the wall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and different types of spaghetti, I guess, too. I mean,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
why I'm writing and photographing and shooting for TV and consulting for life support technologies and on and on and on. There's
Yeah.
public speaking, anything that will keep me underwater.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you do go into such a kind of a niche industry or a niche kind of category, you do have to really diversify the ways you kind of use that. When you're in the Cayman, when you started in the Cayman Islands, what was your path from there to then actually getting into the sort of documentary world?
Well, slow, I guess. I mean, back then there were photo editors and full-time photographers on magazine staff that were just being sent around the world to get diving stories and everything else. So it was different then. To break into that was incredibly difficult. And so it was slow. I just kept submitting articles and kept sending in photography. But it's different now. I mean, I think ultimately, if I had to look at one thing that kind of changed the trajectory for me, it was volunteering. So, I don't think that you should give away your work, because if you give away all your work, then it's worth absolutely nothing. If people know they can get it for free, then they're not going to want to pay for it. But when you find creative ways to volunteer, to get yourself onto a project or something like that, and then retain the rights over your goods, your assets, then there's a lot more that you can do with that. I mean, ultimately, creating assets that continue to deliver over time, whether that's stock or ideas or experiences, that's where your unique value lies that nobody else has. And so it's just a constant rework of how you can put those out into the world and turn them into value.
So I have been reading your book, Into the Planet. And again, it's very triggering for me. Mm-hmm. So I can only read a few chapters at a time before I've got to walk away and calm down. But in there's an awesome point where I think you end up volunteering to do an expedition into the Florida Springs and start mapping that. From memory, that seemed like that was your introduction to kind of cave diving exploration. Is that right?
Well, my first big expedition was back in 1995 with the U.S. deep caving team down in central Mexico, where we were working to explore what we thought would be the world's deepest vertical cave system. So that was really where I kind of kicked open the doorway and met people that I continue to work with today.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But that did also convince me to move to Florida, where we had this very high concentration of underwater caves that I would continue to explore and work in for about 20 years before I returned full-time to Canada.
What was your experience of the first time you had gone into a cave and were mapping it? Like, what was the first experience of treading, like maybe one of the first kind of lines through a cave system?
Yeah, and that, I guess, I'm trying to think back, but yeah, probably the first sort of major exploration was that project in Mexico. And, when you get to what we call the bitter end of a line, where we run a continuous guideline through a cave system, one, so that we have a tactile reference that we can follow to get out of the cave if we lose the visibility, which is not uncommon. It can easily happen in an underwater cave.
Yeah.
But two, we use that as a navigation reference, and that's what we will measure both distance and direction on in order to map a cave system. So when you get to the bitter end of a guideline, like you swim and swim and swim along this continuous guideline, and then it stops and you look up and you're looking into the blackness and you think there's a way to continue onward, you tie on a spool, a reel basically, and then you set off into a place where nobody has been before. The feeling is out of this world. It's so exciting. You really have to almost tamp down the excitement in that moment.
That sounds incredible. How are you mapping? Like, are you kind of doing something that's very scientific, or are you in there just kind of excitedly wandering around?
No, you're very carefully using a compass and a fiberglass tape or guideline that's knotted in increments so that you can count the distance on the guideline. So it's a very slow, methodical process. That's the traditional way. And I've worked with engineers and scientists who are trying to make better, more accurate mapping technologies And one in particular, I've worked with Dr. Bill Stone since the mid 90s, and he has developed mapping systems that are now artificially intelligent robots that we can set loose in the cave, and they
Oh,
can swim on their own, make choices about moving left or right, and map the cave in 3 dimensions with unbelievable accuracy.
wow.
So that technology exists now. It's not affordable or deployable for most of us, but that's where we're headed.
So that's releasing a like an underwater Roomba to kind of wander
Kind of,
around
yeah,
and yeah,
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. It's amazing to watch it think. Like, I have frequently been in the position of filming this mapper through its development over the last 25 years. And to sit in a cave and watch something that's not tethered to the surface, this entity thinking for itself, and it'll get to a pillar and it'll kind of rotate and spin around and make a decision to go left or right, and then it'll go right, and I'll say, gosh, I would have gone left. What made this artificial brain go right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Does it? I mean, there's so many obstacles in a cave. It's not like a corridor or like I say, like a Roomba. It's not like it's mapping your
Mm-hmm.
house, which is all square edges and lines. Like there's so many
Mm-hmm.
obstacles in there. Do you ever?
Yeah.
Does it ever get caught? Does it ever get stuck? Do you ever lose one?
Well, that's all part of this whole development process that I've been very fortunate to watch over the years. I mean, the first one, we had a tether on it so that we could oversee what it was watching. We couldn't send it commands, but we were watching it from topside. Well, I was in the cave and the engineers were topside, and it at times would sort of burrow into something that was too small and start stirring up the silt with its thrusters.
Yeah.
And then it became clear that it was stuck. And so the software engineers go, okay, well, how can we teach it to avoid this obstacle or this type of obstacle? And slowly but surely, as they reprogrammed it over the years, it's now independently, going off and fetching cave maps and bringing them back.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch, and its ultimate mission is not just to explore the inaccessible places on planet Earth, but to go to Jupiter's moon Europa and explore the liquid ocean underneath the ice there.
Well, I think that's a fascinating thing is that a lot of the work that you're doing under the ground, under the water, is very similar to stuff you would be doing, and technology wise that you'd be using either in space or, like you
Hmm.
say, on other planets.
Yeah,
Are
yeah,
you are you part of that kind of, I don't know, research into those
yeah.
sorts of development?
Yeah. I've been a test pilot for life support technologies that are not just for use underwater, but are analogs for, what could be used for a spacewalk, for instance. And then, this device as well is, destined for space. So diving is often used by astronauts and space researchers as an environment that has so many similarities that can, teach them about existing in space, moving in space, or deploying technologies in space. But also, I've worked with astrobiologists who are interested in the life within caves because it's the most like the primordial soup that, served as the earliest sources of life on Earth and might be a great analog for what we would find in space.
I guess because they're so low light situations or no light situations, and
Yeah.
probably low nutrient. I guess
Hmm.
that the life in there must be very
Resilient.
simple
Yeah.
and
Well,
resilient.
not
Yeah,
necessarily simple, but very resilient. I mean, we
yeah,
have, you know, everybody's familiar with a crayfish, that they see in a river, but we have uniquely cave adapted crayfish that have no eyes and no pigments, so they're white, transparent looking, and they live about 100 times longer than crayfish that live in rivers. So in this very food scarce, difficult, dark, no light environment, they have somehow adapted to be much more successful than the crayfish that are living out in the light. Yeah.
yeah. That's incredible that they've made the
Mm-hmm.
most of so little. I guess.
Yep. Yeah.
And that brings up another adventure that I know you're a part of, which was, and I don't know if it was mapping or just exploring the insides of icebergs. What
Yeah.
was that?
Well, back in 2000, the largest iceberg in recorded history calved away from the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica. And so my two colleagues and I pitched to National Geographic to be the first people to ever cave dive inside an iceberg. And, back in 2000, we were just barely starting to talk about global climate change. And yet we wondered, was this huge piece of ice some, sentinel of what was to come? Yeah, so we went from New Zealand to Antarctica, which is a 12-day sea crossing in the worst seas on the planet, to go intercept this iceberg and be the first people to both explore and bring back images from inside an iceberg.
So how big an iceberg are we talking?
It was the size of Jamaica.
Okay, so yeah.
It's pretty big. In fact,
Yeah.
just last summer, the very last parts of it finally broke up and disappeared back into the ocean. So
Wow.
20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what was it like? Did you know that there was going to be crevices and cracks that you would be able to get into, or were you just kind of hopeful that that was going to happen?
Well, we gave a really convincing pitch to National Geographic, but the truth is that it was all a hypothesis.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we had watched the cracks developing in the ice shelf over time in satellite images online. And so in my mind, I was thinking, wow, this is just like limestone. I mean, cracks develop and then water exploits those cracks and enlarges them. So surely this must work like limestone. Surely, currents and the motion of water underwater must, carve spaces. And so we, went in there just full of bluster and pitched to Nat Geo, and they went, wow, ooh, that sounds amazing. But frankly, like, we didn't know until we got there what we were going to find. Well, just an amazing, amazing new world. It was 30 days before I felt like we were finally in a real cave system. We'd gone in all these little caverns and crevices and overhead environments, but then we found these massive long conduits, through the ice, and
Yeah.
places where the iceberg was stuck on the seafloor, where you could swim under the iceberg in tunnels.
Oh, wow.
And it was stunningly beautiful, unbelievable. I mean, some of the deeper areas were completely black, just like an underwater cave, but turn on the light and there was life within these spaces, and just what I consider to be closer to going to another planet than anything I've ever seen on Earth.
That's incredible. Do you think you'd ever like to go to another planet and do this like on Mars?
Yeah, I don't think my husband would be too thrilled about it.
Is he a diver?
He is certified, but it's just not his thing. So,
Yeah.
He's got about 20 dives under his belt, but
Right.
I don't think that he'll ever dive again. But yeah, I mean, if someone said, would you like to go to space? I wouldn't hesitate. I'd be like, yeah, I'm there.
That's
where do I
great.
go? Sign me up.
Well, yeah, I guess the stresses and the fear points, I guess, are all pretty similar. I mean, you're in an environment that you can't survive in without assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
what's
it's all
interesting?
kinda...
What's interesting, though, is that so far, anyway, our space program, you could always call mission control for help. I mean, when you're alone in an underwater cave on your own, the best person to rescue you is already in the cave. Right?
Yeah,
it's you.
that's right.
There is nobody coming to save you if something goes wrong. So you best deal with your own tools and abilities and get yourself home.
Well, this is something that kind of blew my mind when I was exposed to cave diving. I go to the Florida Springs a lot. I love that area for photography. It is like a spiritual place to me, outside of the caves, obviously. The hanging out in the car park there at, say, like somewhere like Ginny Springs or somewhere, you've got all these cave divers coming in and going out. There's like a procession of them getting into the water or coming out. And a lot of the ones that I speak to there are diving by themselves.
Oh, yeah.
They're soloed.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is that?
So I used to live across the street from Ginny Springs, interestingly enough. Yeah, it is a beautiful place. But yeah, a lot of us solo dive. In fact, almost all of the diving that I do these days is solo. There's just no one around me that has the same interests, background, and abilities. And so I feel like I'm much safer on my own, literally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel like having someone else with you would give, I don't know how to say it, like would possibly cause more problems down the line?
In many cases, yeah. I mean, if I'm taking someone with less experience with me, then I'm constantly thinking about them too. I mean, when I'm on my own, even if it's hard, if I'm trying to light up a cave and shoot something on my own, it might take a lot longer because I don't have any assistance, but I don't have to worry about anybody else. I'm just focused on myself and my job at hand. Yeah.
So how does that work in terms of your photography and your filming? If you're down there by yourself, are you lighting up caverns by hiding strobes in different places, or what's your
Yeah.
kind of process?
Yeah. Yeah. So up until very recently, everything was with slave strobes. And so I would very, very carefully swim through the cave, trying not to stir up any silt, and very carefully place my slaves, and then get back to where I'm ready to take my shot, and then trigger everything and hope it all works. Right.
Right. Yeah.
These days, as cameras and the sensors improve, we're using a lot more continuous lighting, and that's a little bit faster and easier, frankly, to envision what you're shooting. And so I'll just set up a bunch of lights and swim through. Sometimes I'll set the camera on a tripod and, and be in my own shot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Do you just put on self timer or something, or do you have a trigger?
Yeah, most of the time I'm just using a timer.
Yeah. So it's going off like every 10 seconds or something.
Yeah.
And then, so you get all these awesome like outtake shots of you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, throw a lot away, keep the
yeah,
beauty.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's really fascinating. Because with most cave diving stuff, I just assumed there was at least one other diver who was possibly holding a slaved strobe who could help light it up.
Yeah.
But if you're in there by yourself and say your camera's on a tripod, then you go and swim down and put a strobe, and then you got to swim back to your camera, take a shot and go, well, that's not right. And then keep changing like that. And so it must take quite a lot of effort to get a good shot.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of effort. It's a whole lot easier. I mean, if you've got a buddy that's competent and knows what they're doing with lighting, then yeah, you can get a lot just swimming through the cave and shoot. But yeah, when you're on your own, you'd spend an entire dive just trying to get one shot that you have envisioned in your mind. Yeah.
Right. So you'd be going into that dive going, okay, we're going to go to this cavern and this is the shot I want to try and get today. And if I get that, then it's a good day.
Yeah.
A lot of these caverns, and especially with the springs and stuff, they're made because water is forcing its way out of the earth. Mm-hmm. So you have a constant current, I guess.
Yeah, very high flow, especially in Florida caves and my local cave here near Ottawa, very high flow. And so it's physically hard work, and even, setting up your gear too. Sometimes you have to take weight belts in to hold down the camera to keep it from blowing over, or same thing with lights.
Yeah. That'd be like being in a wind tunnel.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it is that strong that you cannot physically kick against the flow, and you have to pull yourself along. So you have to have creative ways to carry your camera and weights and tripod and lights and a lot of extra equipment that's not necessarily, or you don't want it to be neutrally buoyant, because you want to be able to put it down and for it to stay there.
Yeah. Are you working with scooters or any sort of propulsion under there?
Sometimes, most often not, because it's just one more thing that I have to deal with. It certainly does make life easier when you're kind of zipping in and out to drop things off, but you can also inadvertently stir up the silt, and so sometimes just swimming it methodically is the smart thing to do.
Yeah. And I guess that current is kind of a double-edged sword as well, because on one hand it's clearing all that silt pretty quickly, but on the other hand it's forcing you to, it's resistance the whole time.
Yeah, and it depends on the cave. I mean, in Florida, it's certainly blowing the silt out, but those caves are dived a lot. They're popular, and so a lot of the silt on the walls and ceiling has been blown out just by traffic over the years. Right. But the cave I'm working here in Canada, it's got only about 2 or 3 feet of visibility, and it's all soft silt constantly just blowing at you. Yeah.
Is that something that you kind of use as an effect when you're shooting film? I mean, video, that like kind of snow coming through?
I mean, certainly it's obviously sort of compelling when you're shooting that, and people see that, they're like, whoa, I can see the flow now. I get it, that it's hard and this is extreme. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been listening to your podcast, which I think is the same name as your book, the Into the Planet podcast. And it's fascinating because you cover all these different topics about cave diving and all that sort of stuff. But one thing that kind of stuck with me as I was listening was, and I think it was the episode about Ben's vortex.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying in the podcast that as you were going into this cave and you were kind of searching for the body of Ben, that you and your partner got to the end of the cave and you could see that the line just disappeared into a pile of sand, which meant
Yes.
that at some stage this cave was bigger than it was.
In underwater caves, we have like aquifer pressure that's causing this current through the caves. And over time, as humanity has continued to suck more and more groundwater out of the ground and lowered the water table, the pressure has lowered and the flow in some places has slowed down. And when the flow slows down, it's that flow that's keeping the cave open, basically. And if you get to a squeeze point at the end of the cave where there's high flow coming through a situation like that and you see line that's buried into the sand, if you push your way into that opening and you cork that spot, then all the sand will just kind of cave in on you, you know. I mean, thinking back to the story that you told at the beginning of this podcast, if your body blocks the hole in an underwater cave, you've blocked the ability for the cave to stay open, basically. So if you were in an underwater cave in that situation, the sand would have slid in down around your legs and your waist, and then your upper body would have been the only part, you know, that wasn't buried, basicely.
So you can get buried alive whilst cave diving.
Sorry, I just gave you
that's another
material.
Trigger. Yeah, I've got a little checklist. I'm playing trigger bingo right now. Yeah,
yeah.
That sort of stuff is crazy, and you must have to be able to make a judgment when you look at a squeeze as to whether it's worth pushing through.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that have, you know, paid with their lives in situations like that, and yet some people have, you know, survived those situations through that discovery learning that I talked about, where it's like, oh wow, this was a bad idea.
Yeah,
to get myself unstuck. Yeah.
And do you have to back yourself out?
Yeah.
And I guess that's another reason why diving solo would be a lot easier, because you then don't have someone behind you.
Well, you don't have anyone that can pull you by the legs, but yeah, you also, I mean, really one of my closest calls was when I was diving with a scientist and I was leading into the cave. And when we turned to come out, the scientist got stuck and panicked and got wedged. And the way I describe it in the book is that the scientist became the cork in the bottle that was containing my life, because if I couldn't get this person unstuck in the blackness of a silt out, while they were panicking, then neither of us would have come out of the cave that day. And
because they were blocking your exit.
Yeah. Maybe that experience made me much more of a solo diver.
Well, I mean, when you've got to weigh up the, you know, risk versus reward situation, then having only yourself to worry about would make a lot of sense.
Well, I remember in that dive, I mean, even after I got the scientist unstuck and I patched the guideline, I had to do a search because I couldn't see. I'm doing everything by feel, right? And I lost track of this person, and I had to search. And I searched for an extra 73 minutes beyond when this person had already made it out of the cave and called for help. And, you know, when I look back on that time, it's like that whole time I'm thinking, wow, I might die. Both of us might die. It's, you know, quite something to to reflect on.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, kind of personality building as well. If you get that close to thinking that this is the end, and then you make it home.
Yeah, then you have to decide: is this something I really want to do? Is the risk worth it? Is it fair to my family? Is it, you know, all of that?
And I guess you've the answer to that was yes. You want to keep doing this.
Yeah. It wasn't a quick yes, though. My poor husband, it was traumatizing on him that day.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
You know, I mean, my friends were writing letters and emails to me that were the things they would have read at my funeral. It was the eulogies, you know, and just mentally grappling with all of that was difficult. I mean, for my husband, it was like, you know, how much more do you have to do? When is enough? When can we just have a nice, quiet life together?
So that must be an interesting dynamic with you guys. And he must be very understanding of your need to do this.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, he said, you know, when will you give me the time that you give to these expeditions? When will we do something special for months on end, you know?
Yeah.
And so we ended up riding our bicycles across Canada together that summer just to kind of process mentally what had happened. And then during that bicycle ride, we were showing a film that we had created called We Are Water. And it's, you know, it was a real labor of love. And every night when I showed the film and I talked to people and talked about cave diving, he got to see my face light up, and he realized that what I do makes me who I am, you know, and he can't take that away from me or ask me to stop, because that's forcing me to be someone that I'm not. And the girl that he fell in love with, unfortunately for him, you know, means that it comes with this stress, the stress of waiting, you know, the worry, all of that. And so I have to be as respectful as I can to him and make the right choices in terms of risk and help him to understand why I love what I'm doing and why I feel it's important.
Yeah. Well, he sounds like a keeper.
He is amazing. I hit the jackpot.
Yeah. And so he's your filmmaking partner as well, right? Like you guys make films together?
Yeah. Yeah, he's my audio guy, and yeah, he has a background in production, and yeah, if I didn't marry him, I might have hired him.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, you have hit the jackpot. You don't need to pay this guy anything.
Yeah, I pay him twice as much as I make.
So speaking of filmmaking and that sort of stuff, I know that you consult on a lot of films and documentaries and stuff as well. Can you talk me through kind of the sort of productions you've been involved in?
Oh yeah, all kinds. You know, I love documentaries and natural history programs, that, you know, that kind of thing. But I've also done a few Hollywood gigs as well, which is fun and interesting, and maybe more dangerous than cave diving.
Oh, why is that?
Well, there's a lot of pressure on film sets. I did my first big, like, I'd done a lot of TV, but my first big Hollywood production was a movie called The Cave, an underwater show that involved a monster and technical divers. And the whole production, the director, everybody were not cave divers. So I was the technical consultant, I was the stunt supervisor, I was producing all kinds of things. And they're constantly pushing you to do things that are not safe,
Yeah.
or they have unrealistic expectations about what's possible. So I'm constantly having to rein everybody in. And when I took that job, I said, listen, right away, I need in my contract that I can yell cut at any point. And they went, no. Sorry, the director is the only one who can do that. And it's because you might yell cut and cost us $100,000. I'm like, well, if I can't yell cut, it might cost someone their life. So I need this in the contract before I'm willing to sign on and take responsibility for the safety of the people that are in the water.
Yeah,
and it's a really
sure.
good thing I had that power.
Did you need to use it?
3 times. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. What sort of situations were they?
Well, one was quite different and not necessarily associated with underwater, but we had this whole cave set basically, and we are having explosions and water cannons and all kinds of stuff, and my role in that day was just to do a stunt basically to surface in this cave entrance and pull a whole sled of stuff out of the water so the actor didn't have to do it. And as the water cannon went off, I saw this like sort of rip open up in this fiberglass wall that was about 40 feet high. And I yelled, cut, look out. And then this whole massive piece of the set just fell over.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Right into the water where we'd been. Yeah.
And so you were shooting this in a tank?
Out in Romania. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was amazing. We literally built an Olympic swimming pool. Like, we dug the hole the time that I was there, made this underwater cave set that had a water slide of cave tunnels into it, a waterfall, and then a football stadium size cave as well that had a sump where you could enter into a pool, swim underwater, surface in another pool. So, and I had to be responsible for all the safety on all of these sets in addition to everything else I was doing.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it was a lot of pressure. It was really stressful at the time. And I look back on it much more fondly now that it's all over. Yeah. But it was tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Were the actors doing much of their own stunts?
Well, one of my jobs was to train the actors, none of whom were even divers, let alone cave divers, and we were using rebreathers, this advanced form of life support that's different from normal scuba gear. So I originally had the plan of training them all so they would be able to do a lot of their own stunts. But as I've learned, movie budgets always get slashed and cut, and some of the most important things end up by the wayside. And I
Yeah.
only had one diver that ever made it through open water training, so none of them were capable of doing their own stunts. So we had to use my crew, and everybody had to be trained and work together to do some amazing, interesting stunts, which was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Did you get to do anything yourself? Were you on
Oh yeah.
camera?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I played three different men in the show as well as,
Oh,
as one of the women
okay.
actors.
That's quite
Yeah.
diverse. Yeah.
Yeah. But once you're dressed up in all of that equipment, nobody can see who you actually are when only your eyes are showing.
No, I mean that probably helps a lot too
Yeah.
with the production of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was being a woman in this, and I hesitate to call it a sport because
Hmm.
it's more than that. But
Yeah.
what was it like being a female coming into this kind of, I keep going to say industry, but it's,
Yeah.
what would you call
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I don't really like the word sport. Just like you say, it's so much more. It's, it's a vocation, avocation,
Yeah,
whatever. But it's been challenging. I mean, I've been a woman in a niche within a niche within a niche that are all male dominated. I mean, diving is still male dominated in general. Technical diving even more so. You start carrying a camera underwater, and it's extremely male dominated. And even the expeditionary end of things has had its challenges. And like many aspects of society, we still have a long way to go for acceptance that women are equals. If we are
yeah,
given equal access to equipment, training, and opportunities, then there's no reason why we can't be just as successful and effective in these underwater environments. So
absolutely.
so I had to blaze the trail a little bit and upset the apple cart from time to time, but it's getting better. It's getting better.
Do you find that there's more women coming into the this?
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
keep going to say sport, but I can't.
Yeah.
What's another
Yeah.
word we can use?
Yeah, I don't know. I've always struggled to find the right description for it. I mean, for some of us, it's a lifestyle, really.
Yeah. Well, let's stick with that.
Yeah,
Let's do
yeah,
lifestyle. Are you finding
yeah.
that there's more women coming into the lifestyle now?
Yeah, I've made it a real personal goal to mentor and help other women move up through the ranks and become cave diving instructors and technical diving instructors. Because I think when there are more women in the upper echelons of training and within jobs in underwater opportunities, then it inspires younger women to realize that it's possible. I mean, you need to see someone that looks like you doing these things in order to feel like there's a fit and an
Yeah, for sure.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting as I sort of go back to the Florida Springs experience for me, where I'm meeting a lot of cave divers on the on the entry into the springs, and you get talking to them, and it would be pretty much 50-50 of it would be couples going doing training, so they'd be their instructor
Mm-hmm.
and then the couple, and you'd speak to them, and there was always one out of the two who was like, oh no, I'm just doing it because they want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 50-50 in terms of
Mm-hmm.
males and females. And it was always interesting when you see the guy go, oh, no, I'm just doing it because she does it.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's awesome that she's, you're
Yeah.
just going along because this is her passion and letting her guide you into this thing. You might not even want to be doing it, but you're going because she wants to.
Yeah, 2 years down the road, she'll probably be the only one doing it.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have advice for people that are getting into cave diving?
Well, I mean, it's a long process. I mean, a lot of the world is moving faster and faster these days, and a lot of people want instant success. And you can certainly walk into a dive shop and buy an underwater scooter and a rebreather and all kinds of technical diving equipment. But I remind people that experience and time in the water is the most important thing, whether that's time to develop your skills and abilities as a diver or time to work at your creative craft of shooting underwater. It takes time. And so you need to be patient, and you can take lots of courses and you can have mentors, but nothing will replace true experience and a few scares along the way that make you better.
Yeah, just to build up that tolerance to it, I guess. Yeah. And just finally, Jill, is what inspires you? Are there people that inspire you to kind of push this further, or is it the world itself that inspires you?
Yeah, I think there's just so much left to explore, and I get inspired every time I take on a new project or work with a new scientist. I mean, right now I'm working in what most cave divers would not even bother with. It's a small, tight, high flow, low visibility, cold water cave. And most people would say, no, thanks. I'll wait for Florida for the
Right.
springs.
Yeah.
But I'm working on fascinating science with a malacologist who's not a cave diver. And I become his hands and his eyes. And, every time we review the footage together, I learn something new. And to me, that's very inspiring, learning more about our natural world and how the interconnections of the planet work. It's the best part of my work.
Yeah. So that discovery is the inspiration to keep you discovering. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful feedback loop. It just keeps you going. Amazing. And what have you got coming up? Are there projects in the works that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, these are such weird times because I've lost, right now 6 months of work, and the next 6 months have all been postponed. So many projects and expeditions are hopefully just postponed. Some are going to be gone forever just because of the funding implications of what institutions are now dealing with. So I still have things on the horizon, and I'm unsure of when they'll go off. But I've got some work with Bob Ballard off the California coast in the Channel Islands, where we're exploring caves that may have once been used by humans. Yeah, working on documenting these completely new, undescribed ecosystems inside this local cave, and I'm working on another book. So yeah, I've got lots to keep me busy.
This is good. Yeah. Have you been able to get out and dive in the whole COVID situation?
Yeah, the first 3 months, I, like everybody else, just kind of stayed home in isolation because it didn't even feel right to get in the car and take an unnecessary risk that could land in the hospital. I didn't want to stress any emergency or medical system, but things have really settled down here in Canada, and diving has resumed. And yet it's still in my mind. I'm still very socially isolated from people because I can't afford to get COVID. I mean,
oh no! I mean, it attacks the respiratory system so badly that
it could easily be the end of my diving career. So I'm not even seeing my family right now, which is tough. But
yeah, I mean, that's a point though, because I speak to like underwater models that I work with and other photographers and stuff, and it's not till you kind of talk about the long lasting respiratory issues with COVID that they're like, oh. Yeah, okay. I think a lot of people think I'm just going to be getting the flu and it'll be over in a week.
Yeah,
whereas
it might be. You might get lucky. But yeah. No, I think I'll be continuing this sort of isolated life until we have a working vaccine.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for the next well, possibly years, I guess.
I think so. I mean, I think we do have to really prepare for the long term here.
Yeah. Well, luckily, the virus doesn't seem to like being underwater.
Yeah.
I think we're in the right industry.
Maybe I'll just have to make myself a habitat.
Yeah, find a nice cave somewhere. Jill, it's been amazing. It's just, as I say, this has been so triggering for me, but it's also so fascinating and empowering, hearing that you're doing these things that I find so scary, and hearing you talk about them so calmly and so technically kind of makes me feel a lot better about possibly, entering that world myself at some point.
Ah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, we're all explorers right now, stepping into the darkness. And whether you become a cave diver or not, you face those similar challenges in life where everything ahead is unknown. So hopefully everyone will embrace that exploration gene and do something that's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, get out of the comfort zone a little bit. That's awesome. Thanks, Jill. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, it's been lovely talking to you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. If you'd like to help with the production of these episodes, you can donate at theunderwaterpodcast.com. Any amount is welcome and really helps to keep the show going. If you'd like to connect with us or learn more about our guests, you can reach us at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group where you can discuss the episodes and even get your questions answered by our guests. There's a link to it in the show notes. You can learn more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring at brettstanley.com or Brett S Photo on Instagram. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.